So I've been meaning to do some different kinds of content for this channel, and I want to sort of put out a bit of a test episode here and see how well it goes. This is going to be a series where I do a spotlight of independent animation, independent web series, because when I do Rob Watches and when I do Cartoon Clip Show, I don't target independent creators unless they, request that I take a look at their work in the case of, like, the Weaklings when I reviewed that. And it seems a bit unfair to go after independent creators. However, there have been a few web series I've watched over the past couple months, couple of years that I really liked, and I wanted to do videos about them. So today we're going to start with a video series based off of one of my favorite things on the internet, the SCP Foundation. For those of you who don't know, the SCP Foundation is a community-driven website where people can post fictional entries about monsters and strange entities and magical objects and all kinds of crazy stuff. Most of the entries are very creepy. Some are incomprehensible, but that's kind of by design. And there are even a few sad ones. Incidentally, if you want to have a bad day, look up the one called Where the Dragons Went. Whoever wrote this one was clearly going through some stuff. And it's the job of the SCP Foundation to secure, contain, and catalog all of these anomalies. The SCP Foundation itself, if I was to describe it, is, well, do you remember the movie A Cabin in the Woods? You know, that organization that existed underneath a cabin that held all the monsters and things in captive? Yeah, imagine if the movie was focused entirely on that, and then make it 10 times weirder. It is quite an impressive piece of fiction because there are literally thousands of entries, and they're all community-driven, and they go into incredible detail, some of them. There's very long-winded explanations and descriptions. There's interactions with other SCP creatures and things like that. They even go into things like experiment logs and interviews and stuff like that. It is very, very well detailed. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. You can spend all day going through so many entries and not even scratch the surface. The SCP Foundation spawned tons of fan art, and they even made a few video games about it. And I recommend checking out some of the SCP readings on YouTube, where they go through the whole website and do readings of some of the entries. Some of the channels I'm most familiar with are SCP Readings, and she probably has the biggest backlog out of anybody. But there are also some other channels that will go a little bit further and actually roleplay as staff or scientists or military personnel from the organization. Some of the other ones that are worth checking out are The Haunted Reader and The Vulgan. I know there are other ones out there, but these three are the ones I'm most familiar with. If you like science fiction and horror and just generally weird stuff, I highly recommend checking this out. But then I found out that someone was doing an animated series based on SCP called Confinement. It's created by Lord Bung, and he does a bunch of other animations too, but I was first drawn to his channel because of the Confinement series. It's been going on for a while, and there's only a couple episodes out so far, but it's really well done. And I should mention that some of the members of the reading community, including SCP Readings and the Vulgan, actually provide voices for the series. It's mainly focused on a character called Connor. Connor is a D-class personnel, basically some human they send in to interact with an SCP that may or may not get killed. Basically, the D stands for disposable. However, in Connor's case, he's an immortal. Every time he gets killed, he just sort of poofs a new body and he just keeps going. Connor basically spent his whole life at the Foundation and doesn't really know much about his past, and because of that, he pretty much has nowhere to go. So there's this big dilemma of whether or not he's actually imprisoned alongside the other SCP, or if he just works there. And there's also a doctor trying to help Connor figure out what happened in his past, and even though they haven't really said much so far, based on what I do know about SCP, it's looking pretty messed up. I really like how they interpreted a lot of the SCPs, especially some of the more abstract ones, because this series gets very, very weird, and for someone to actually visualize some of this strange stuff is not an easy task, especially in episode 2. If I was to compare this series to anything, I would say it kind of reminds me of Ugly Americans. If anybody remembers that show, it was a Comedy Central series, and it's very underrated. In fact, I'm kind of upset that it seems to have already been forgotten about now. but it kind of reminded me of it because it was, you know, a weird world, but they had these characters who, despite being in this world or having strange abilities, they seem very down to earth and relatable. In fact, this show is so well done that I can totally see it being aired on Comedy Central or even Adult Swim. The only downside I can see with this series is, well, I think you really have to be familiar with the SCP Foundation to kind of understand what's going on here. Fortunately, in the description of each video, they post links to all of the entries that they're referencing, so you can use that as a reference guide. But to the unfamiliar person, it might be a little too out there, especially maybe episode 2 and episode 5, but I think that could also be a draw to it, because it is kind of absurd that it's very interesting to watch. But I highly recommend the series, especially if you're a fan of the SCP Foundation. And if you're not, I recommend doing a bit of research on it, maybe checking out some of the readings of some of the entries, and then check out the animated series. It's really, really good. So anyway, that's the first episode of this series. I'm probably going to call it something like Web Series Spotlight or something like that, assuming that name hasn't already been taken. It's kind of general. But I do have at least 2 other things that I do want to talk about for this. Ultimately, it'll depend on how well this video does. So if you like this video, let me know. If you want to see more, let me know. Be sure to hit the like button. And thank you very much for watching.